Pliss, and I'm the Senior Chair of the Gerontological Society of America's Emerging Scholars and Professionals Organization Webinar Task Force. Along with Dorina Petrovsky, Joanna Chase, and Megan McCutcheon, we would like to welcome you to this, our 5th installment of the ESPO Professional Development Webinar Series. The title of this webinar is A Balancing Act, Navigating Work and Life in Early Career. Our speaker, Dr. Daniel Kaplan, will explore relevant issues related to work-life balance. Dr. Kaplan is a clinical social worker and assistant professor at Adelphi University School of Social Work. We will allot about 20 to 25 minutes towards the end of the presentation for questions. To ask a question or pose a discussion topic, you can type in the control panel on your screen in the question box area at any time. Note that your audio will remain muted throughout the presentation. You can also contribute today via our Twitter webinar hashtag, which is hashtag GeroLife, also found on the bottom of each slide. Thank you to our speaker for his time and effort in preparing this webinar, and thank you to our audience for your attendance. We hope you find this to be an educational, useful, and meaningful experience.
Well, thanks so much, Evan, for the introduction, and thank you to ESPO for hosting this webinar series and giving me an opportunity, to talk today. My name is Dan Kaplan. As Evan mentioned, I'm a gerontological clinical social worker and an academic. I have a job at Adelphi University. And it's really an honor for me to have a chance to talk to my peers who are also navigating work and life in early career. I really hope to address both of these issues, the work side and the life side today. I find that we often talk about work and life balance, and sometimes the focus is more on the work side because that's difficult to get our minds around, but I'm going to try to talk about both. It's important to recognize also that each of us has really different visions of what success means, and we have profoundly different life circumstances. And so this idea of a work-life balance, it has to be customized to fit our own visions of success and to fit our own life circumstances. So for this reason, I'm not even going to try to attempt to give any sort of formula that will work for anyone. I don't have the expertise, and that's probably an impossible task. Instead, I'm going to tell you about the really purposeful approach that I've taken to creating my own formula and why it works for me. Perhaps listening to this description will inspire some new considerations for some of you. And we'll have time at the end, as Evan mentioned, to field some questions and comments if you care to submit any. Our professional goal is always going to be some form of success, right? But what does success look like to you? What you see here is the recipe for success that most of us have been inundated with since starting down the road to academia. It begins with a lot of training in research and analytical skills that are complex and fairly difficult to master. And we continually nurture some extraordinary expertise in several small areas of knowledge that we carve out as our space. And we're told over and over again about how federal funding and tenure and a job at a top research institution are the prizes we should work toward winning. Our mentors and professors and colleagues constantly tell us what it takes to win those prizes. Sacrifice, hard work, carefully choosing institutions to work at that are known to be the best, and a heaping pile of publications every year. Simple, right? So we each inherit this idealized model of success, and the people who guide our careers, they help us take steps toward those goals. I remember thinking as a doctoral student how lucky I was to have all that help from mentors, because these goals are really hard to reach. But I also remember telling my wife how wonderful it is to have help in reaching these difficult goals, and she looked at me with a puzzled expression and said something like, "Is that really what you want? I didn't think that was why you left your job and went back to school. I thought you said you loved to teach. And then I thought, she's totally right. I just forgot what I really wanted. So after a little soul searching, I realized my own vision of success at work does not look like that idealized version that I'd been told was the right vision. And my overall life goals are so much bigger than whatever achievements I can make through my work. You know, there are so many other important areas of life. And I need mentors for all that stuff too, because some of those goals are also really difficult to reach. And when I stack up all the goals in these different areas of life against one another, I can see a clear hierarchy of importance. It became painfully obvious that sacrifices are necessary, but in each domain, not just in my personal life, but in my professional life as well. So that's what I'd like to explain today. I was never comfortable with the phrase work-life balance. The tension between work and the rest of life, it's not really a balancing act. You know, to achieve balance implies somehow giving equal weights on two sides in order to prevent tipping. I think this is an unrealistic ideal and a very misleading metaphor. No, the tension between work and the rest of life, to me, is much more like a tug of war. I probably should have changed the title for the presentation today, but, you know, as a pacifist, I'm reluctant to promote anything with war in the title. But tug of war is more fitting. Each side has several people exerting force, and each side will pull harder at times and then give up ground at other times. And the real goal is to not let either side pull the other part of your life into the mud pit. The forces on the side of your career, as we know all too well, are service to the institution, profession, and community, active research and grant writing, your work as a teacher, who is responsible for the formative training of future providers in health and mental health professions, constant dissemination of knowledge through publications and presentations, your work on 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5 committees, and vigilant focus on assuring that you meet the requirements for tenure and promotion. That's a pretty serious list of major efforts that are so hard, even on their own, to maintain forward motion at all times. But on the other end of the rope, to keep the metaphor, is the rest of your life. You know, what sort of routine efforts are required to address your health, the emotional needs of your family, the attention we must give to our romantic partners, if we have any, our own personal growth and fulfillment, our own mental health and happiness, and what can be very tenuous and sometimes convenient relationships with friends. So this, too, is a serious list of major efforts. If we attempt to prioritize all of these areas, and your list of areas will be somewhat different than my list of areas, I think we can all agree that what you see on this slide is completely unrealistic. We can't assume that it's appropriate to give each area equal importance. That's not the way it works. And remember, this is not a chart of how to distribute our total energy, but a chart of how we rank the importance of each area according to our own personal and cultural values. So how can we adjust this bar chart to reflect our priorities? You know, each of us is influenced by a multitude of powerful forces. Our own values, the gender, age, our culture, our health, our family, our social network. Once we acknowledge the role that all of those forces play in shaping our values, it becomes clear that our definitions of success and the efforts that are required to achieve that success should also be highly personalized. This knowledge will free us from feeling obliged to conform to that idealized vision of superstardom that we've all inherited. Here's an approximation of my own prioritization of these areas of life, the ones I chose to list. There are many other areas that are important, of course, but these offer a nice degree of variance. Please don't later submit questions about the methodology I used here. These values are not based on any sort of actual data, but the illustration makes a point. based on my own whimsical estimations of my own personal values, it becomes immediately clear that areas of life outside of work hold the highest priorities for me. So when I did this, I thought, wow, that really changes the tenor of the conversation about work and life and the balance between the two. In fact, it makes me question whether the word work should be in the lead in that phrase. Then again, where did I hear that phrase? At work. So that's the focus. Some conclusions I drew with these insights are, first and foremost, my most important long-range goals are for happiness and health and joy and love for myself and my family. I mean, those things seem pretty important, right? Also, my career is meaningful and important, but really it serves as a means to those other ends. Therefore, academic superstardom is probably not something I need to worry about. I only need to achieve enough success to keep my job and to feel personally satisfied with the work that I do. That was a realization I had to make. And that'll be different for you. For me, I thought about how these priorities impact my actual day-to-day life. You know, if I'm going to carve out time in my schedule for different tasks, which I always do, you should see the color-coded insanity of my Google Calendar. I'm thinking that playing with my kids on a regular basis will establish strong relationships and joyful experiences for all of us. And this is really important. Alternatively, if I protect regular time for chipping away at writing, I will publish more manuscripts and submit more grant proposals. And those are great goals too, but I should probably let that type of effort take the back seat when I can't afford to do both activities in any given certain week. Now, what does all this mean about the work that I do? First, I'd better make damn sure that when I'm working, I bring my full attention and passion. I'm not going to waste any time when I'm working on my work. And since I got into this situation because of my love for teaching, prepping my classes and giving my time to students in need will always win out over other work tasks. That's just my choice. Academic productivity is essential for keeping my job and for feeling fulfilled. But I can yield exponentially higher returns when I work in collaboration with my peers. Plus, collaboration automatically grounds my professional efforts in social contexts. And as an extrovert, I'd start to feel suffocated if I did all of my scholarship in isolation. So I like to work with others. It feels good, it feels comfortable, and you get a lot more returns. Of course, there are times when pressure to perform in one area of work is very high, but I make it my business to really try to schedule time for each work task on a regular basis. I usually fail to pull that off, at least more often than not, but I try. This inability to balance teaching, research, scholarship, and service, that failure is one of the sacrifices that I'm willing to make in order to achieve my long-range life goals. Understanding my willingness to make this sacrifice helps me to feel more comfortable turning down requests for involvement in new projects. A lot of the people who registered for this webinar wrote in with questions about how to say no. For me, this realization, this prioritization, this set of values being clear in my mind made that easier. I'm happy to say that this is not a good time to start something new when people ask me to get involved in a project. I'm happy to say that I would love to get involved, but I'll need a considerable amount of help to make that possible, that I can't take on as much as you're asking me to take on, but I can be one of the players. I got my PhD at Columbia, which is a very, very fine institution, excuse me, and one of the top schools of social work in the country. When I was on the job market and putting in my applications at different schools, I started to realize that there are very important differences in the cultures of these different schools that I was interviewing. So for me, finding a home environment that had a culture that fits my values became a top priority. Most importantly, I adjusted my expectations about my career. I decided I don't really need for people to point at me from across a conference hall and whisper to their friend that that's an extraordinarily productive and brilliant scholar. I don't need that. No, what I really want is for my colleagues at my own institution to think that I'm a decent coworker who contributes to the academic lives of our students and makes a reasonable effort to add something of worth to the profession. As for the rest of my life, another set of impacts needs to be discussed, the non-work part. Most importantly, I have a rich life of heavy involvement with my family. My wife and I have a lot of time together, and we both have a lot of time with our children. If I have to work in the evening or on a weekend because it's a crunch time or a crisis, it is purposefully kept to an absolute minimum. We've decided to live very near our extended families because their love, support, and instrumental assistance with raising these kids are things I would never trade. Just as it is important to schedule meetings with our collaborators at work, sometimes far in advance, I've also made a point to schedule time to play with my friends. And even with that effort, I find myself thinking, you know, I haven't seen so-and-so in far too long. But those relationships are important to me. So I make it part of my life effort to schedule all of this. My greatest battle is protecting time to exercise, to sing and play my guitar, to get out into the woods. These are things that make life so fulfilling for me. They have nothing to do with my work. They don't even have anything to do with my family unless I make it part of the family life. But I make these things happen as much as possible and hopefully get to each of them at least once a week. These are areas where I'd rather not make sacrifices. Also, my wife and I avoid extravagances so that we don't feel pressure to make more money. You know, we're doing fine. We're getting by without a problem. And we're teaching our kids important fiscal lessons. We don't add more and more and more work into our lives so that we can get that nicer car or the fancier house because we don't care about that stuff. People live happily with a hell of a lot less, and we're totally content. I've also adjusted my expectations about my personal life, but I've raised them instead of lowering them as I did about my work life expectations. I'm now willing to accept only the most grandiose vision of superstardom in my personal life. This just feels a lot better, like something I can be proud about. So those are the plans and the steps that I've been taking. Is it working? To me, so far, it seems to be working. First, I really slowed down the pace and the timeline for my academic career. This allowed me to spend so much time at home when my kids were babies. Our son was born when I was doing my doctoral studies, and I took care of him 3.5 days a week for the first 4 years of his life. I would never trade that for anything. Our daughter was born when I was doing a postdoctoral fellowship, and I've been fortunate to be so heavily involved in her life as well. The flexibility that's afforded by those stages of training really made it possible to be the kind of father I wanted to be when the kids were babies. I left a great job 8 years ago to travel down this road to academia. With all the priorities that I've described and their impacts on my life, work, tug of war, it has still been possible to do meaningful and productive work, just less of it at a slower pace. I've got enough publications and presentations to kickstart my CV. I've been loving my work as a teacher and so excited to learn how to teach several different kinds of courses. I've had a few research grants, and I'm working towards others. I met a lot of amazing leaders and mentors along the way. And it felt very good about the service that I've been giving to the schools where I've studied and worked, to the professional societies like GSA and ESPO that have supported my training, and to the larger academic community. I landed a job at Adelphi University in New York, which has a great culture and environment in which to work, and which values teaching for the same reasons that I do, to nurture a competent workforce that can provide great care to the clients who need our help. In social work, education, I think a lot of us are driven by this, and it's so enriching to be in an environment where the faculty share that prioritization. So maybe I'm not the superstar that my mentors would like me to be, but I got the job that I wanted, and I intend to keep it. Meanwhile, the rest of life is going, I would say, smashingly well. This approach is made possible by the help of a lot of other people. I am definitely not able to pull this off independently. My wife, Amy, has been amazing as a partner and a motivator and an enforcer of all the ways in which these priorities and values impact how we spend our time as a family. And the larger extended family has been invaluable, as I said before. I've also made a point of identifying and appreciating all kinds of other types of mentors, besides those who are helping to shape my career, including a lot of peers like you, who I think are living so well and serve as great role models for me, and other role models who have absolutely nothing to do with academia, acknowledging that the way they are succeeding in life is important for me and that I can learn important lessons from them. I'd like to encourage all of us to evaluate our life-work tension through this lens of long-range goals. We can accept our own unique visions of success. And if we do that, a lot of the questions that we have about how to balance the many demands at work, the multiple conflicting demands between work and the rest of life, the difficult multiple demands of life without regard for work, all of that, it becomes easier to figure out where to invest your limited time and energy. And it has to be tailored to you, your own unique vision of success. We can understand better that fulfilling that vision requires sacrifice in every area, including our careers. We talk about work-life balance and sacrifice, but we only seem to make the sacrifices in our personal life. Our work lives should not be immune from taking a few hits for the team. And most importantly, we're gerontologists. When our clients look back on their lives, what are their most painful regrets? Has anyone ever complained to you about mediocre publication rates? No. What people care about most in late life are the lost opportunities to attend to the love of family, friends, and themselves. So I, for one, refuse to create a system on purpose that leads to that type of regret. So that's the basic structure I'd like to present for balancing work and life in the early career. And I know there's a lot of complexities here, and there's a lot of specific issues that you may want to discuss. So for now, I'll thank you for listening to the presentation part, and we're going to switch over to talking about the things you want to talk about. So I hope that you will submit some comments and questions, and our colleagues at the ESPO organization will translate those questions and comments onto the webinar so we can talk about them.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kaplan, for your wonderful presentation. There were a number of questions that were submitted ahead of the webinar, and other folks, please use the question tab of your control panel to submit any questions that you might have in addition to the couple that I picked from the ones that were already submitted. So the first question is, what is the best strategy for emerging professionals, quantity or quality of publications?
That's a great question. I will say this one time instead of after every question, but I certainly don't know the right answer. We're peers in this. We're in the same place more or less in our early careers. For what it's worth, quantity of publications is probably a more surefire way to achieve the kind of acclaim and recognition from people who make important decisions about your career, like your peers on your faculty, like the people thinking of hiring you to join their faculty, like the dean who will make the ultimate decision about your promotions and tenure. These kinds of people will want to know that you're publishing on a regular basis. It's really hard to write very high quality publications. I remember in my doctoral studies doing literature searches in my area of scholarship and thinking, okay, I can name the 3 or 4 people who have changed this area of study, right? The big thinkers, the people who developed the major theories or changed the theories or did the major research. And then there's a whole army of people who have done less important but totally significant scholarship. So how many of us can become those big thinkers who write those amazingly important seminal publications in our field? I don't know. Hopefully all of you can be. Hopefully I can be someday. But we're talking about early career work, right? I know that from looking at the statistics of who registered for this, a whole bunch of us on this call are doc students working on dissertations, taking classes, maybe being on the job market in a postdoc, whatever it is. Why have that burden on yourself? Publish effectively, publish efficiently, work with friends to publish a bunch of stuff, and worry about writing seminal works a little later in your career. To think we have the writing skills or the expertise or the size of research studies that can inform major changes in practice and policy at this stage in our careers. Well, maybe you do, but I don't. I certainly don't. So publishing little pieces based on, literature, based on small studies, based on, critiquing gaps in theory. These are ways that I've been able to find partners to write with, to, put some manuscripts into press at a time in my career when I needed to have something on my CV. Of course, everyone always says, you want to be publishing in peer-reviewed journals that are of high quality. Well, that sounds great, but unless you have an abundance of data at your disposal and can do really good science using those data, it's hard to publish in those kinds of journals. So should you wait until you have that set up, or should you just publish all the while? I would say publish all the while. Over time, your publication life will evolve. At least that's the way I think about it for myself. So for what it's worth, I hope that's useful.
Great, thank you so much. There is a question about balancing clinical work and academia. So the question is, how do you balance the difficulties of clinical work and personal life / self-care?
Oh. Well, here we have a couple of ways to interpret that question. At first blush, it seems the difficulty of multiple conflicting demands between clinical work and personal life would mirror the demands between academic performance and personal life, but this person may actually be introducing a third domain, academic and clinical and personal, which just makes it all the harder. And I know as a clinician myself, you can't sacrifice the quality of your performance or your availability to clients in the clinical sphere because it's so critical that people get the help that you promise to deliver. So let's see, I don't know how to gauge how to adjust the priorities there, but I would think that a natural impact of having that kind of conflict would be that the scholarly life is the lowest priority, that your clinical and your personal life would win out over scholarly work a lot. And I've done some evaluation work with gerontological clinicians in social work, nursing, medicine, and psychiatry. And I think what I've seen by looking at an enormous pile of CVs of these professionals is that for people with really active clinical work, the volume of their scholarship is a little lower. For people who work purely in academic, teaching research contexts at universities, in fields where they don't also have service clinically in hospitals or mental health settings. Those folks seem to have more time to put towards publication and presentation. But then again, you also see on the clinical side a lot more collaboration with scholarship, papers with 8 or 10 authors contributing little bits based on their role in the clinical team. So that can be an asset when thinking about scholarship. But the demands on your time are very real. And the same way that I would suggest we advocate to protect our personal life time from the demands of an academic position, I would say it's critically important to also protect your personal life from the demands of a clinical position.
Great, thank you so much. Now moving to the questions that are being submitted. Thank you to all those who have and are continuing to submit those. The question is, Dr. Kaplan talked a lot about finding both professionals mentors and peer mentors. I'm at an institution without many mentors or peers in aging. How can I find both of these kinds of mentors within the GSA or ESPO?
Well, one idea to consider is that your mentors don't need to be in aging. You can have people who have a really good grasp on making good decisions about your career that work in some sort of other related area, not just aging, and the lessons that they can translate to you might be really worthwhile, irrespective of their specialty knowledge base. The same is true of peers, of mentors outside of academics who can talk to you about important things about your life, like your family and your happiness. But in terms of aging, I know that traveling to the conferences like GSA and ASA, I'm an Alzheimer's disease and dementia scholar, and I often go to the International Alzheimer's Conference. You will bump into people, and you will sign up to go to receptions, and you can put yourself in situations where you come across folks who will be good peer mentors or senior career mentors. The real issue is whether or not you take advantage of those opportunities. And for me, I'm sort of extroverted. Like, I like going up to people I don't know and just throwing it out there, introducing myself, asking people if they can give me a few minutes so that I can ask them about their work or their career, because I'm impressed with what I've heard or learned, right? And I know for some folks, like, that's not as easy, or it can be intimidating. So you'll have to find some approach that works for you. But I think it's really worthwhile, because every time I've ever done that, people who I've approached are so generous. They're so responsive, right? There's some sort of commitment to nurturing others in the field, especially those who are more junior in their career. And I've never had someone give me a funny look, ever. So I would say be bold about taking advantage of the opportunities. And to make the opportunities in the first place, see if you can get to those events. And actually, I recommend you serve on a bunch of committees for these organizations. I've always been active in GSA and some other organizations in service. And when you start to serve in these groups, like the folks who organize this webinar series, they're networking with each other, and they're meeting all the senior people who help to make their program possible. So service to these organizations is a good one. I've also done something where there are people I'm aware of that are on my radar for being really senior thought leaders in my area. And believe it or not, I just wrote to them out of nowhere, out of the blue, and introduced myself and asked if they could give me a 10-minute phone call to give me some guidance about my research. And that has worked really well. I now have in my life 3 or 4 mentors who are really senior scholars in their area, in my area. And that initial phone call led to plans to get coffee at the next conference. And that coffee meeting led to willingness to serve as a consultant on my research proposal. You know, so it has to start with something. And I never was comfortable waiting for it to fall in my lap. I just went after it. So I would say get active in these organizations, cold call people that you think are amazing, and just get yourself into their awareness and ask them for advice about something you're thinking about, a study, a publication, your career, whatever it is. And I think you'll be really pleased with how responsive folks are in general.
I also wanted to add that the GSA now has the initiative, the Mentor Match initiative, that I think some of the folks might be interested in taking part in, just from hearing how you described it, Dr. Kaplan. So I think that's something that would be of interest to our participants. Yes, and then a related question to this one is, there's a question about how you've talked about finding mentors in your area of expertise, but how do you find life mentors as opposed to career mentors?
Yeah, how do you find life mentors? Well, I would find it surprising if in any of our lives we don't have people that we think are just amazing at something we care about, an amazing parent that you've seen at some school function for your kid, some colleague perhaps who is just so happy in their personal life and you're wondering how they do it, some friend or friend of the family that is you know, really making time in spite of a busy career to pursue hobbies that they love, that kind of stuff. That's how you find them. You just have to think about, what do I want to spend more time on, and what are my struggles to fit that into my life, and who's doing it well. For me, you know, I care about a handful of things that I talked about earlier with the slides, and I had to think about who's doing those things really well. And then it's just a matter of, you know, introducing yourself or asking if you can, you know, take someone out to lunch or coffee and pick their brain about how it is that they make time for this. How do they carve out time for these things? And it's not just about time management. It's also to feel inspired, right? Like if I see someone who's an amazing parent, I just want to know more about them. I want to know more about their philosophy on life and parenting. And, you know, you just get inspired from talking to people. But, again, it's sort of a purposeful exposure to the people who might be inspiring. And it takes effort. And that's the other thing. Seeking out these mentors, joining professional societies and serving on their committees, all of that is just more effort. When you have such limited, the whole point of this is, how do we manage such limited time and effort that's available in our day-to-day life? And here we are suggesting you do more stuff. But that's the whole point. You have to choose where you invest your time. And choosing to invest in connecting with inspiring mentors and getting support from your peers on a regular basis and attending to your personal life, those are investments that, for me, are really worthwhile. And I have colleagues, just like you do, who have a totally different life circumstance, and I'm just blown away at how productive they are in their work. But I know that we have different lives, and we have different priorities, and it's not a situation of better or worse. It's just a situation of having the right fit for you. So for me, the right fit is, you know, what I talked about earlier, and to make that possible, you have to sacrifice somewhere. And it comes down to adjusting expectations for the career. And I don't want to say that you shouldn't strive for success. It's just a matter of deciding, what does success mean in these different areas for you? And if superstardom as an academic is what you want, then go for it. By all means, go for it. Surround yourself with those mentors, but acknowledge at the same time that in your personal life there's going to be tremendous sacrifice.
We have a couple of questions that I think are related, so I'm going to read them both. First question is, it seems like the overarching academic culture does not share the goal of attending to meaningful relationships. Any ideas about how we as emerging scholars can go about starting to change that culture so that prioritizing family life is valued? And then sort of a tag-along question is, how do you suggest having conversation with your mentors who are pushing you at the expense of your personal life or priorities?
Oh, God, those are great questions. Okay, this is going to sound like a cheesy poster with a meme and a cat dangling from a tree, but it starts with you. Like, where did we start to change the culture? We have to start with our own participation in that culture. That's how all culture change starts. And you're not alone. You won't be the starter. You'll find allies, believe me. I remember when I was a doc student, a person who I consider my career mentor extraordinaire, someone with such tremendous success that you will be in this person's shadow the rest of your life. They're amazing. And this person said to me, at some point you're going to have to get some babysitters and get serious about your work. And I remember saying back to her, no, I don't think so. To me, that would be going in the wrong direction. I'm extremely serious about my family, and that's where my values are, and that's where I'm making all these decisions. And my work is going to be in, making that possible. So it's just like a different path I envision for myself. And she said, okay, I can respect that, right? To acknowledge out loud to your mentor that you have a vision for yourself in your life that may not look like the idealized vision of success in academia, that shows your strength. That earns their respect. And that takes the pressure off. Because they think you want them to be driving you toward that vision. As a mentor, they are thinking, what can I do to get this person to be prolific in their scholarship? How can I support them in reaching that goal? But if you say, you know what my goals are? Better balance and enough scholarship to get a good job, but to also really enjoy my life and everything about it, in work and out of work. And I'd love your help with that too. Well, that just changes the whole focus, right? So for me, I've had to say that out loud to people. And the same thing happens with peers at work. When I was a doc student, when I was a postdoctoral fellow, and now that I'm on the faculty. People say things to me all the time, like, oh, you have young children? That seems hard to balance it all. And I impose my view on the culture of academia by responding to those comments instead of ignoring them. I say, well, for me, family is the most important thing and always will be. So I do what I can to make sure my family comes first. But I still do good work, and I'd love to tell you about it, right? So it's just a matter of being a vocal advocate that I've chosen a path, and I'm going to succeed in that path, and I'd love to tell you about how and why, and no one's going to give you a problem about that. If you're clear, if you're firm, if you trust that you've made good decisions, you can feel proud about it, and people will respect your pride in those decisions. Great.
There is another question. The participant said that they loved your presentation and it's very human. The question is, how did you find this perfect home for you at your current university?
Okay. Okay, so thank you for the feedback about the webinar so far. And I will make it even more human by admitting publicly several challenges that I have faced in doing that. For one, I I had to restrict my job search geographically because of my commitment that I was happy to make to not moving. So how many schools are in the area that I can commute to? And among those schools, how many have a job opening in the year that I'm looking? And among those with job openings, how many are looking for someone with my particular set of credentials and skills? A clinical gerontological social worker. Okay? So the job search process was very challenging. I was thinking about, will I need to hide my gerontological focus, right? Can I position myself as someone who studies health and mental health in general with particular attention to families dealing with late life issues? Okay, I could do that, I think. Although my CV has the word dementia in every single line, and anyone with a modicum of insight would realize what I'm all about if they looked at my CV. But I thought, I come from clinical practice, and I study healthcare, and I can do that. And then as I went around to interview with schools, I learned that in the process of being interviewed and interviewing them, that each school and each person on the search committee, they have different interests. Whether or not you're a right fit for what they're looking for is so hard to predict. And I remember thinking in certain interviews, this went so well, I'm definitely going to get the call for a campus visit and a job talk. And then you don't. And, a lot of my friends going through the experience with me had this similar experience, and we all agreed, this really doesn't have anything to do with us. This is about, we are what we are, and the school is looking for something. And most of the time, schools are looking for several things. And you might have been a candidate in one of those areas, but there's politics involved within the school, and whether or not you're a good fit is largely about them, not you. So what I decided was, I need to find a school that is a good fit for me instead of making myself a good fit for them. And once I switched gears for that, I started to think about all the schools in the area. I actually called upon my social network of professional peers who were already working at those different schools, right? That's another part of being socialized into academia, where you have colleagues that you've met through your service to national organizations that are working at other schools. And as a doc student or a postdoc, that kind of exposure is so valuable for this exact reason. I called people at every one of those schools on the phone and asked them to tell me about working where they work. And I gained all this insight about the culture, stuff they were willing to tell me, stuff I had to deduce because they wouldn't tell me or they got quiet when I asked certain questions. And you put it all together and you puzzle together all those pieces and you got a clear sense. This school seems to eat their young. That school seems really intense and divisive between different camps of the faculty. This school seems like a unified group of people who care about something important. And as you get those sort of hidden reputations, and sometimes they're not so hidden, it becomes clear, would I want to work at a place like this? Would I want to work at a place like this for a short while and then know that I'm going to move later? Is it dishonest to take a job where I know I want to move later? These are the kinds of things I was thinking about. Ultimately, I felt so comfortable choosing Adelphi and so grateful that they chose me, because this was a school where I got a good vibe about their culture. It's a place where I knew I could work for a long time, and I wouldn't have to be thinking about a clock guiding when I would start looking again. And that's all I wanted. All I wanted was like a secure, comfortable home where I could do my work and not have to worry about this stuff anymore. So that was my goal. Other people had different goals. I had friends who wanted to get their first job at a top research institution so that later on they could move to other schools and be comfortable in the second location, knowing that they'd be a power player when they did move, coming from a top school. But I never cared about being a power player. I just wanted to do good work. So I didn't want to go through that kind of tense early career, pre-tenure experience. I wanted to start off someplace perfect for me. So that really changed how I went about searching and interviewing.
Great. Another question. Given your strong value for family, how do you maintain a positive attitude towards the need for publications? And how do you maintain momentum in publishing while still keeping yourself grounded in what's important in your life?
Okay. Well, positive attitude's not a challenge for me. Maybe it's a personality trait, but I'm a real optimist. And that probably infiltrates my views on all kinds of stuff that's relevant to this discussion, including publication. The truth is, it takes a lot of work to get publications together. It takes so many hours. And I've had all these colleagues and friends talk about writing every day as a secret to success, and that might work for them. For me, that doesn't fit well into my challenging work and life tug-of-war situation. To me, working in spurts, working on my writing in dedicated blocks of time and making sure I schedule those blocks of time in a realistic way so that I don't have to keep bumping them. That's the thing I hate most. You put this thing on your calendar, I'm going to write Friday mornings, and then you bump it, and you bump it, and you bump it, and it drives me crazy. So I'd rather schedule realistic amounts of time and make sure I can hit them. The other thing that's really the most powerful tool for productivity and publication for me is having writing partners. If my writing partner and I, and sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 people are working together, that's great. And interdisciplinary writing teams are amazingly effective and inspiring. But to me, that writing team approach is the most effective. And the reason it's effective is because you owe somebody something. So don't ever set up a situation with a writing partner where you're like, I'll work on my part, you work on your part, let me know when you've gotten somewhere. That's the worst. Make it so that you owe each other things on deadlines. And for me, it's much better to have those deadlines be soon and the deliverable be small than say, I'm going to write half the manuscript and give it to you in 2 months. Because 7.5 weeks from now, I'm going to be like, oh, I should write that half a manuscript. But if next week I owe you 2 paragraphs, I can do that. So for me, what I love is with my partners, we get on the phone and we make an outline together. Open up a Google Doc, you're looking at it together, fill in this outline, give yourself a week to digest that outline and move things around, give it to your partner, let them digest it and move things around and give it back, and then fill in the outline. You do that chunk, I'll do this chunk, and give yourself a week or 2 to do that little chunk. And sure enough, all of a sudden, the whole outline's filled in, you've got a draft, and then you're in editing mode. So it's really effective. But promising that working on your own is so hard, and promising to do a huge piece of a paper with an unknown distant deadline, it's just not realistic for me. So you got to find your own way, but for me, that's really effective. Did I hit both points?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
I think so. If not, the person who asked me a question can let me know.
Okay.
There's a question that I hope you can sort of touch upon. How do you feel your experience of balancing work life with your family is sort of corresponding by your gender? So how generalizable do you feel your experiences are to your female counterparts?
Okay, so it's probably dramatically different, to be honest. As a social worker who cares deeply about social justice, as a person who considers himself a feminist, I know how different the experience is. I don't know what the experience is personally, but I know that it is certainly very different. So for me, I'm sure that I have enjoyed tremendous privilege because of my gender. And I know that when I talk about taking time to be with my children, it is a different conversation than women would be having. That said, my wife and I made an arrangement when my first child was born, and that arrangement was structured in such a way that when we added up the hours that we were parenting this child, they were equal hours. Because of the equal hours, we also felt we were sort of equal co-parents, equals in making decisions, in thinking about what the child needs, in reading the books about parenting. We did all of that equally. And I know that that's uncommon. For me, that's what was important. I didn't want to be, I have a lot of friends who are men who have their jobs and they see their kids 3 mornings a week and on the weekend, and that's it. And for me, that's totally unacceptable. I wanted deep and profound involvement in the lives of my children. Is that more similar to the experience of a mother? Maybe. But as a man in academia, when I say that I'm valuing family time and making sacrifices in work to assure family time, I'm sure that the response of my colleagues is different than if I said that as a woman. I don't know in what ways it's different, but it must be. That's just the way society works with regard to gender and parenting expectations and parenting roles. I know that there are tons of questions that have been submitted about adjusting your sort of tenure clock and dealing with your employer at the institution when you're thinking about raising children when you have a job in academia. Again, for us, we really planned purposefully to have kids before I got an academic job, knowing that as a doc student and a postdoctoral fellow, I'd have the flexibility to achieve the kind of parenting involvement that was important to me. Sometimes you can't plan as far ahead like that, I'm sure, and you end up in a job, and then you want to have kids, and that must impact everything. And I don't know a good answer. I would say think about finding a colleague somewhere who has had really good experiences as a mother while having an academic job and asking about what worked for them, what lessons they can share with you. For me, I didn't have any role models. I didn't know any fathers in academia who were working a lot in their home family environment. But I had a lot of friends who were mothers, and they taught me a hell of a lot. They taught me about how to have a home office space and deal with being productive while the baby's napping and while the baby's crying and, you know, juggling all that stuff. I learned a lot from the mothers. So in some ways, there are some universal experiences about being intensely involved in the life of a baby. But for me, I never had to juggle that at the same time as being in an academic position. Right now, I'm full-time, tenure-track academic position, but my babies are now 7 and 2. So we're talking about school and preschool, and I'm still involved every day in their lives. But as a man, I'm sure that it's a different experience than what my wife experiences or women in academia. So I'm sorry if I don't have a great answer for that.
No, I think this work, and we only have a time. Actually, we're almost out of time. So I just wanted to thank Dr. Kaplan for his excellent presentation on behalf of the ESPO Webinar Task Force, and I would also like to thank our audience for their attendance and the questions that they submitted. Upon leaving, the audience members will receive a survey for the webinar, which will include a space where you can provide suggestions for future webinars as well. Please take the time to provide the information on how we can tailor future webinars to your needs as ESPO members. Also, there are a couple of opportunities that are going to be coming up in the email to our participants. The first one is Careers in Aging. That's going to happen in April, so there you can learn more about career opportunities outside of the academia as well. As I mentioned, Mentor Match is another way for you to find mentors in your area of expertise. And the last one is there's going to be a call coming in the month of March on how to be involved in ESPO, including a call for self-nomination. So this is just another way for you to volunteer your time and be involved and connect with your scholars in the aging area. So once again, thank you everybody for attending the webinar, and Dr. Dan Kaplan for his presentation. Any final words from you, Dr. Kaplan?
Just thank you again for this opportunity. It's been so enjoyable, and I hope it was worthwhile for folks who took the time to dial in.
Great. All have a wonderful weekend, and thank you everybody for attending.